Hey, everybody, welcome to a call. We have a couple special guests on this call where we want to talk about the VA loan, the assumption process. So LeRoy Romero found and spoke with Kaitlin McCormick about her experience. And actually, we just made the request, hey, Kaitlin, would you mind coming on here? And she said yes. And so I'm super excited to have Kaitlin on here to share as part of the group, just her experience in this process. So let's just take a minute. And if you both would introduce yourself, Kaitlin, I'd like to start with you. Tell us more about you and where you're coming from.
Yeah, so my name is Kaitlin. I am a Marine Corps veteran, um, and I've actually worked with LeRoy to buy two houses now, so we've become quite familiar. But we just moved up to, well, I say we just moved, but it's been almost a year. Crazy time flies, but we just moved up to Washington State recently. I'm originally from here, so it's nice to be back, but it's been quite the journey.
Right. Well, that's awesome. And being from the Northwest myself, I'm happy to hear that, although I'm not there anymore. So hopefully you're still enjoying the tall trees, because I'm in North Texas. They just don't have trees like they do in the Northwest. LeRoy, what about you, brother? I think most people should know you from your comments, but give us that intro.
So LeRoy Romero, also Marine Corps veteran, Semper Fi. So yeah, just part of VA. I've been part of it since the beginning, and just a ton of questions. And so as we navigate through, Kaitlin and I have worked together for quite some time. Her family's amazing. She was down here in Arizona, transitioning over, and we went through the assumption process. And so I thought, gosh, it would be so awesome to provide value to the community, understanding and knowing like what those struggles are, but an actual live person that can talk about what that process is like. So we've got a list of questions, and we're just gonna hang out, and this is for the group, and I just hope everybody gets something out of it as we go through the market that we're in now.
The VA assumption is asked a lot. That question is asked all the time, and because it's difficult, because the VA by congressional order says, yes, we will do this. This is fully applicable. Everybody has to do it. And then you turn to your lender and say, I want to allow my loan to be assumed, or I want to assume a loan. And they look at you cross-eyed, not really look at you because they never talk to you. The servicers don't. They get on the phone or emails, like email chains. But you can just imagine how they're literally just thinking about you, going like, why are you bothering us with this? We don't want to. Daunting, can be a bit of a time, right? It takes a lot of time. And so, LeRoy, I think you got a couple questions on this for Kaitlin. And Kaitlin, just fill in here, but take it away. What are we thinking we want to cover first?
Well, I thought we would just start with like maybe Kaitlin. So you bought your house in Phoenix, Arizona in November, I think it was like November 2021, right? And
Yeah.
so you and your husband, both veterans, which is amazing. And so I think we used your entitlement, right, to buy the house here in Arizona where I live. And so like, at what point you're living in the home, and then like what happened? You got transferred, like you were moving, and kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we bought the house in Arizona, and then I think it was August of 2022. My husband was entering his senior year in school for electrical engineering, pretty in demand field, and he had a really competitive offer from a company up here in Washington. And we are like, wow, like we really can't beat this. You know, we get to be close to my family again. Um, we get some seasons. We don't have to deal with 120-degree summers. Like we get to see some snow. Let's make the jump. Let's do it. So we ended up listing our house in September of 2022, right around Labor Day, I believe, is when we had that listed. And we entered into what turned out to be a very slow market. I think we missed the margin by probably about 2 weeks. Everything just kind of slowed down, and then we were kind of racking our brains. We were doing open houses on our house probably every weekend because we were set to move up here. My husband had a start date of January, right after the New Year's, so we were like, okay, we're moving either way. Like, we got to figure something out here.
So you initially listed your house. Were you thinking like assumption? Did your agent talk to you about having someone assume your loan, or were you just looking to sell and get rid of it?
So we were looking to sell and get rid of it, and we actually, after probably about 2 months on the market, we also had it listed for rent. So assumption was like not even, we didn't even know what an assumption was at that point. It was something that our buyer's agent had brought up. I think that this particular buyer had looked at our house in the fall and had mentioned it, and we were like, no way, like not worth it, not something that we're interested in, especially because they're not even offering us our asking price right now. And at that point we were still only a couple weeks into being on the market, so we shut it down really quickly. But after the timeline kind of kept progressing for us, we're like, okay, we really need to consider this option. They brought it up to us again. Our buyer isn't a veteran, so that scared us. But what kind of reassured us was that both of her kids were Marines. She had written a letter, and our agent had looked at it and said, like, she really does seem to understand the gravity of the situation with the assumption. Because that was our biggest concern with the assumption once it was brought up to us, was like a portion of my entitlement stayed with that house, because we don't have a veteran assuming our loan. Like I don't have that until she pays it off or sells it, or like that's scary. But when it came down to it, we had to get something moving. So we were like, okay, let's jump in. Let's go under contract with her, see what happens. Like, just because we're going under contract doesn't mean she's going to be approved. Like, we'll see. We'll see what happens, but let's just try it out.
So as a veteran yourself, you had just said like she wasn't a veteran, so it was a civilian that, well, or what we would call a civilian, right? A civilian that assumed your loan. And so when you said it was a little scary, what was it that was scary about that? That like, just what was the feeling behind that?
Like, at the end of the day, our entitlement, we go to work for that. Like, that's something that we earn as veterans, that you don't just get handed out. You have to complete your service to have that, and that, among all the other benefits we have, like, I don't want to just give that away. So it was something I really had to consider, and it was something that my husband and I, both being veterans, we had talked about at length, because it was my entitlement. I have a disability rating and he doesn't, so I have a little bit of extra benefit there that he doesn't. Because it was my entitlement, he left it up to me, saying like, hey, that's what you earned. That's, at the end of the day, like, ultimately you choose what you want to do here. You are the one whose entitlement sticks with this house and sticks with this woman. We're putting her trust into that, to make sure she's paying her bills and, maintaining my entitlement at the end of the day.
Well, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so you go under contract, you accept the entire, or they accept the assumption. So at that point, how long? Which I know how long, but how long did that first process take? And then, curveball, your servicer sells your loan. So walk us through the first phase and then the second phase.
We ended up going under contract. I believe it was actually New Year's Eve, so it was a good New Year's gift to us. So we had to call our original mortgage servicer right after New Year's and get the process started. When we called them, it was still such a new process. Hardly anyone was doing assumptions, so they weren't super familiar with the process. So it was a super lengthy, like, okay, well, now we have to try and get a hold of X, Y, and Z, but you can't call directly into the assumption department, at least with that mortgage servicer. You can only talk to like regular customer service people, and they have absolutely no idea what's going on with that particular servicer. So you get a lot of back and forth. So with that mortgage servicer, our process before they sold our mortgage was going into the 6th month of the process. So went under contract essentially the first part of January, and then from that moment on, we were constantly hounding the mortgage servicer, and then we found out that our servicer had changed as of June 1st. So that whole time, we were going back and forth, and one of the problems that we had with that original mortgage servicer was they required live ink signatures. So what we had to do was we would have to print all the paperwork here in Washington, sign what we had to sign, mail everything down to our real estate agent down in Arizona, and then she would have to get it to the buyer's agent. They would fill out their portion of things and then mail it to the mortgage servicer. And if anything happened to need to be signed in like a particular order, like if we had to sign something after she signed something, it was, an extra few days in the process every single time. So it was a really slow going process, and but you can't get a hold of anyone. We had a big issue with, not being able to get a hold of people. So we had no idea where everything was in the process. And then, we get that surprise in May, you're changing mortgage servicers. Here's the information for your new mortgage servicer. No. So then, as of June 1st, we had to completely start over the assumption process with a new mortgage servicer. Which, that made my heart sink. It had already been such a stressful, just awful process for us because it was so long, no communication, just no idea what was going on, like at any time. But honestly, it ended up being such a blessing in disguise because our new mortgage servicer, I think the entire process once we started it was about 45 days from start to close. They were on it. They were knowledgeable about the process, or if the person that you were talking to wasn't, they would get you to someone who was. They would make sure to get you to the right person or the right department at least, and they were very communicative. They were also super helpful in the process in making sure that everything was prepared. All the T's crossed, I's dotted. Um, and that if I had that experience first, I think I would have so much more positive things to say about the assumption process. But for us, it was just kind of luck of the draw. Like our first mortgage servicer, if I had to stick with them, who knows when we would have been able to close. We finally closed on the sale of our Arizona home on July 14th after starting that process in January. So thankfully, we had a very patient buyer who was able to stick with us. But it was a rough ride for all of us.
Well, and that's what I love about and thank you for sharing that story. Is that when we're looking at the community and there's options for veterans or non-veterans to assume a loan, and we look at affordability, is to understand the patience that has to have in the process. Yeah, obviously you and your husband very, very patient because you went on the market in Arizona in August of 2022, but did not close on the assumption until July of 2023. That's a long time to keep somebody on board. And so having that, which it was why I called you, because I was like, man, I knew it took a while because I was there by your side on that and listening. But you guys were so patient on there. So you bought a house, obviously using additional entitlement with your husband's entitlement up in Washington. So what would you say to the community as far as advice on just assumptions? What's your thoughts about them, I guess? Do you think it's a good idea? You just had spoken about the emotional side of it because we earn that entitlement as veterans. And so we have to, again, trust, right, that somebody's going to fulfill the obligations of the payments, because if not, we're going to get hit on it. So, and then we lose a part of us and what we earned. And so just kind of, I guess my question is what's your thoughts on the assumption? What would you give back to the community and say, hey, here's what I think you should do, and here's why?
So I think overall, I'm happy that we went through the assumption process. In the middle of it, we were questioning ourselves the whole time. We're like, is this the right thing? Was there a better option for us? Could we have waited it out? For us, it was absolutely the right move. our timeline was really non-negotiable with our move up to Washington, so we couldn't stay in our house and continue paying our mortgage there. Actually, because the process took so long, we had our buyer rent from us and just basically pay our mortgage and our HOA and take over all the utilities there so we could afford to live up here and not be paying for two houses. Because we did end up buying up here in Washington before we closed down there in Arizona. But I think really like the best advice I can give is just you really have to consider all the options. You know, there's circumstances like ours where it was absolutely the right move. Um, but there's other circumstances where if you can, I think it might be better to just wait it out. You know, if you have a civilian trying to take over your entitlement, like that's something that ideally I wouldn't have wanted to do, but overall for us it was the best move. You know, there's just a lot of things to consider. Can you wait out the timeline? Because not every mortgage servicer is going to be fast. Like my first servicer was super slow, and like I said, I have no idea how long it would have taken to actually close with them because we didn't get nearly as far in the process that I would have hoped in 6 months. You know, can you wait out the time? Do you have a patient buyer that's going to be able to understand like the longer the process takes, the more they're paying out of pocket or the more they're having to get that additional loan for? um, our our buyer, like every month that went by, she was having to keep more money in the bank to pay towards the house because the difference in what was owed and what the contract price was just the gap kept widening. Thankfully she was super patient and
Let me interrupt you there because that is one thing that we don't talk about a lot. So as a seller with an assumable loan, you listed the house at a value, at a price, and that price was not what you owed on the property, right? Because you have equity growth over time. So you bought the property, it was a good buy. I'm positive Leroy took amazing care of you. You had an amazing interest rate. And so then you have market growth. So you have equity. So that margin, right? If you my left hand below, that's the loan that's going to be assumed. The difference up here, right, is the equity position. She had to come in with it. Did she end up having to find financing for that, or had she saved up money or had a transitionary amount of money for that?
so she was paying cash for the difference. And when we had her renting out our house, what we kind of did is we wanted to have her rented out at market price. Like we would have been making a few extra $100 a month, but because of the situation and because it was taking so long and it
Yep.
was just such a crazy process, we came down and basically had her paying, you know, covering all our expenses down there. So it canceled out our debts at least. And then um, you know, that allowed her to maintain, you know, every month she had to keep setting aside more money for it.
Got it.
So we felt bad and we were kind of more patient with her on that front. If I was mean, you know, I would have loved to rent it out at market value for that time frame. But um,
Well, but the beauty of that too is that you understood, like, and I think this is a big thing. In an assumption, no one's in control of the process. The servicer is actually the only one in control of the process if they want to move quickly or not. Now, you can get the VA, the RLC on your side, and they can hound on them, and you can make all the letters you want, but that servicer has to get it done. As you said, the first one was really slow. The second one actually, okay, 45 days, which I believe is on par to what's required. Like they actually moved it through. Um, but I think that what I hear here is that you were, because of your situation, you understood you had to find patience. She had to find patience. Your buyer had to find patience, and together, then you had to say, how do we make this work? It's not a win over loss. It is a win to get this done. You've got to give a little, take a little to make sure it blends. What was that discussion hard with her? Like, how did your realtors broach those discussions for you? How did you manage the communication 6 months into this? I mean, that's a long time.
yeah, our realtor was great. She was super helpful in making sure that the communication was there. Her and our buyer's agent did all the discussion there for us. But I think on both sides we were both very adamant about, you know, certain feelings and certain um, timelines and expectations. And we were, thankfully, it was a really easy process. I think on both sides, we really understood that it was so far out of our control that we were all really patient with each other. We were very impatient with the process 6 months in, but I mean, that's to be expected. But as far as like the communication with our buyer, everything was great. She was very understanding of the process, and she was appreciative of us doing the assumption at all. And we were of course very appreciative that she was patient with the process, and she was able to really, she helped us out by moving in and renting from us. Like, I honestly have no idea what we would have done if we couldn't have come to that agreement with her. Like 6 months of paying for an empty house up there while we have to have somewhere to live up here, such a stressful thought even. So we really lucked out with our buyer. I think that if we wouldn't have had such a gracious buyer, the process would have fallen apart somewhere along the line.
Awesome. I think that's all my questions. But what I love about it is that this is like real talk. So going through a transaction together, buying a house in another state, moving your family, and then leaving your entitlement up to someone else to purchase that house. But there's opportunities to do that, which is great. So we cannot thank you enough for being on here, and obviously as a friend, as a client. I just thank you, because not a lot of people would go out there and put themselves out there to share this experience in this particular market. And so, of course, you're a Marine, so you're going to step up anyways, which I love. But no, thank you. I don't know that I have any other questions other than just the amount of gratitude for the group. And doing business together has been amazing. So we're here for you, of course. And but if you have anything else, Nathan, do you have anything else? Or
no, I was just going to ask Kaitlin, if there's one more takeaway that you have for the entire group, what would that be? Because you've got a few thousand veterans and active duty people paying attention in this group, trying to figure out, number one, can I get a cool house like with a low interest rate in this marketplace? And Assumption is really the only place I can do it. But number two, I just got orders, I have to move, or like work is amazing. Like, there are so many companies hiring for really skilled labor right now, but it usually requires a shift. It requires a movement. And now they're sitting there like you guys were going, oh my gosh, like the cost analysis, the cost benefit of moving is there. Like, we need to do it, but getting out of a house right now is maybe a struggle. So what I'd love for you to do is give this community like your last, sit them down, sit, kneel, bend, give them what they need to hear right now to make sure this happens.
Don't rule out assumptions. I think it's a great tool that can be used. I think that you want to look at every option you have, whether a traditional sale or renting it out, or an assumption is going to be the best process for you. But I think that it's all something to be considered. At the beginning of this process, was saying, heck no, no way, not a chance. And now here I am, a few months after having sold it, and it was the best choice that we could have made, with the information that we had and the circumstances that we were under. Really, you have to figure out what's best for you and your family and your circumstance. An assumption might not be that, but at the end of the day, it's definitely something to consider and something to look into and see if that's the right move for you.
That's awesome. Well, thanks a lot, both of you. And if there are other questions, like we told Kaitlin, just go ahead and put them below on this post. Like, we're going to have an ongoing thread of communication, and we'll probably pin this even for others that are asking questions or want some more info on assumptions. Kaitlin, thank you for being a member of the community. Thank you for trusting Leroy. Leroy, thank you for bringing this together and putting this knowledge out there for everybody. And with that, y'all have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.